bigger campaign he's on, trying to get justice.
It's a very specific goal for a YouTube video.
Definitely. A direct call to action.
Okay, so let's set the scene a bit. Where is all this coming from? Aguar recorded this video in Katy, Texas. That was June 20, 2025. And his main claim, personally, is very specific. He alleges his key opinion leader's technology was stolen.
Right, and just for clarity, that technology is basically a way to find and connect with influential experts, right?
Exactly. Especially in fields like cancer therapy, where he's applying it.
Okay.
And he claims this tech was targeted for theft by, well, some very big names. Travis Kalanick and Elon Musk. He says he personally demoed it for people involved.
Wow. So, Kalanick and Musk. How does he connect them? I mean, these are huge figures. How does he link them to what sounds like, a personal fight over his specific temple?
Well, that's kind of where it gets intricate.
Yeah, Aguar doesn't just say, oh, they stole it generally. He seems to be building this narrative, like a whole network involved. His claim seems to be that they were somehow involved, or at least, they benefited from this alleged theft. He sees them as part of a bigger picture, not just acting alone.
Right, part of that bigger picture that he introduced. A central figure, Aguar names is Mayela Ment Vilches. She's a Venezuelan citizen. They spell that Mayela Metbvilchec.
Got it.
And her job. She's a cancer researcher at the MD Anderson Cancer Center. So, what's her alleged role in all this, according to Aguar?
Okay, so Aguar claims Mayela spoke to him directly, like while he was still developing this technology. He even says she got demos from him. But the twist, from his point of view, is that she supposedly promised a set of introductions for him back in the so he could pitch his innovation there.
Ah, makes sense.
But he claims those introductions just never happened. And Aguar's conclusion, he asserts the real reason for those interactions wasn't collaboration at all. He thinks it was a deliberate plan to steal his tech.
Wow. Okay, and it doesn't stop with the technology, does it? Aguar gets into something very personal about her immigration status.
That's right. He alleges she got a special ability visa, and specifically directly from MD Anderson. That's what brought her over from Caracas to Houston.
So why is that visa such a red flag for Aguar? What makes it unusual or suspicious in his story?
Well, Aguar sees this as like a really key piece of evidence for his theory. He called it a very unusual situation.
Unusual how?
Because he suspects this kind of visa could actually be used as, well, a form of payment for agents. That's his phrasing.
Payment for being an agent.
Yeah. And he backs this up, or tries to, with a past personal example. He claims another doctor, someone named Maris, or maybe Oropesa, who he says had worked for him as a baby. She later got a similar visa and then went on to work for some prominent surgeon.
So he sees a pattern.
Exactly. For Aguar, these aren't just random events, they're data points in a pattern.
Okay, so Mayela is central. Who else is in this alleged network Aguar describes?
Right, he talks about family connections.
He does. He claims Mayela Ment Vilches has a tight family connection to two other people, Penelope Suarez and Carlos Suarez. And then there's Carlos Suarez, who is Penelope Suarez's father. Aguar makes some pretty specific claims about him, too.
Like what?
He alleges Carlos Suarez is a military posit from Venezuela. Basically like a military guy put into a key political or strategic job. He even compares him to Pierre Cotto, another Venezuelan military figure.
So, implying a certain political alignment or background.
Yes. And Aguar also suggests Suarez might be close to Joel Cabo. We'll get back to him and notes that Suarez is currently in Florida.
Right, Florida. And doesn't Aguar make a really specific accusation about Suarez's practice?
Oh, yeah. It's incredibly specific. Very dramatic. What are the details there?
Well, this is where Aguar's story gets really vivid. He alleges Suarez directly participated in practice. He gives this exact detail. He claims Suarez called his own daughter Penelope on her phone at the precise moment Aguar got into his car.
Seriously, why would he do that?
Aguar believes it was a deliberate move, a way to triangulate the cell phone, pinpoint my location exactly. That's his interpretation. He calls it using the daughter to infiltrate the life of the target. Frames it as deeply personal.
That's quite something. And what's maybe insightful here isn't just whether that could work technically, but how Aguar interprets it as confirmation.
Precisely. Even things that might seem ambiguous get woven into this narrative of conspiracy.
And just to add one more thread here, Aguar also mentions Penelope Suarez is apparently very close to Luis Martinez. He's pizza chef Agor mentioned in another video.
Okay, another connection.
So with all these people, Mayela, Penelope, Carlos Suarez, Luis Martinez, what's the big picture Agor is painting here? What's his overall conclusion about them?
He basically pulls all these threads together to make a pretty chilling claim.
Right.
He states that Carlos Suarez, Penelope Suarez, and Mayela Vilches form an important cluster of operatives here in the U.S. And he claims they're acting as unregistered agents for Joel Cabo.
Unregistered agents working for this Joel Cabo person?
Yeah, he sees them as a coordinated group.
Okay. We've mentioned Joel Cabo a couple of times. As we sort of unravel these connections, Agor seems to single him out with maybe the most disturbing allegations of all. What does Agor claim about Cabo?
Yeah, this is probably the most jarring claim in the whole video.
Okay.
Agor alleges that this Joel Cabo figure uses cancer both as a weapon
As a weapon.
and as a motivational tool to make agents do the unthinkable to try to save their sister parents.
Wow. Extraordinary accusation. Using cancer like that.
It paints Cabo as this incredibly manipulative figure, basically controlling life and death.
And I guess this is where my element Vilches, working as a cancer researcher at T. Anderson, becomes particularly interesting in Agor's eyes. Within this whole context of Cabo allegedly weaponizing cancer, it all seems to converge for Agor right there, doesn't it?
It does. For Agor, her job isn't just a job. It fits perfectly, maybe too perfectly, into his theory about Cabo's methods. It just reinforces his belief that this whole conspiracy is real.
Right. Now, when it comes to actual evidence, Agor offers up what he calls data points. One involves Mayela's house records. He suspects they might be doctored. Can you give us a specific example he uses?
Yeah, he does give one. He says he found a record by Vince Diana Campo Fernando.
Okay, unusual name.
Right. At 12,009 Wington Drive, Houston, Texas, 770-774908. But Agor himself expresses doubt. He says he doesn't think the name Diana matches Mayela. Yeah, and he also questions how the record was written compared to the prior. But he notes the address itself is somehow flagged in the system. So even with the uncertainty, he suggests
Subtle but suspicious. And there's one last data point you mentioned. Another cousin of Penelope Suarez named Casey.
Casey. Okay.
This cousin also works in the medical field but out in California. Apparently Casey accepted a demo of the
Accepted a demo of
so. And later, Agor says Casey was flagged by the pipeline months afterwards. What does flagged by the pipeline even mean here, according to Agor?
It's a bit vague, honestly, but Agor seems to imply that being flagged means she also came onto the radar of this alleged network, or maybe became implicated in their activities somehow. It's another case where Agor connects a seemingly separate event back to his main narrative, like anyone interacting with him or text gets drawn.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap. We just unpacked this really extraordinary set of claims from Ronaldo Agor's video.
Yeah, quite a list.
Alleged theft of his intellectual property, the suspected network of unregistered agents tied by family, these controversial visa uses, accusations of actual physical tracking.
And that deeply disturbing claim about weaponizing cancer.
Right?
And I think this raises a really important question, for you listening. How do we even begin
and maybe what's our role in trying to understand all the different layers of perceived reality.
All right, let's dig in. Think back to that thing about this Chinese flight story. Exactly. That was the sort of thing appearing near Alaska.
every single one of the reported Chinese spy balloon shutdown locations is marked within something called Elon Musk's Geo-Index.
Wait, every single one?
That's
quite a claim. What does the source mean by Elon Musk's Geo-Index? Is that like Starlink data or?
Well, that's part of the puzzle. The source doesn't pin it down to a public system like Starlink. Not exactly. It's described more like a proprietary. Maybe a global mapping or location system tied to Musk's ventures.
Something like that.
Potentially. Something maybe underpinning Starlink or similar tech, but not the part we usually see or hear about. The source kind of implies the vagueness is significant.
And the immediate point they're making with this link.
Their direct conclusion, they phrase it quite pointedly, is that this observation ties the index back to the Chinese.
Wow, okay. So today we're really going to unpack these observations, right? The theories that are spinning out from this.
And what the source thinks should happen next, investigation-wise.
Yeah, because if there's, even a kernel of truth to what this source is saying, it could really shift how we think about global stuff, covert ops, that kind of thing.
Definitely changes the perspective.
So yeah, strap in. This should be interesting. Let's just quickly reset these. So, roughly 2 years back, right? These incidents happened. Balloons near Alaska.
That couldn't reach again.
Shot down by the U.S. military, Air Force, or Navy, I think. And then confirmed. Chinese spy balloons. Big news at the time.
And that's exactly the starting point for the analysis we're exploring.
Yeah.
They used what they call their pipeline system. Sounds like their info gathering method.
Okay.
And the primary finding, according to them, was this pattern. Every single reported shutdown point marked in Elon Musk's Geo-Index.
They actually use that phrase.
They do. And they even ask rhetorically, imagine that. What are the chances of that?
Huh.
And then explicitly state, this ties the index back to the Chinese. It's a very direct assertion.
It really is. It immediately makes you ask, well, how do these things even navigate? Unmanned balloons crossing oceans.
Right, they're not just drifting randomly on the wind, presumably.
No, they have to adapt to weather, wind direction. Surely they need some kind of network connection, right? To be controlled.
That seems logical. And the source's pipeline apparently also flagged the official story that came out back then.
What was that?
News reports citing someone from the FBI, allegedly. The explanation given was that the balloons were just using regular internet service providers.
Yeah.
Standard ISPs.
Okay, like connecting to commercial satellites or ground stations.
Something like that, yeah. Using the everyday internet infrastructure to phone home, essentially.
But our source material takes issue with that. Strongly.
Very strongly. This is where it gets quite controversial. The analysis basically argues that this FBI explanation is wrong.
Just wrong.
Worse than wrong. They believe the FBI person, or maybe the team involved in that assessment, might be, in this direct quote from the source, working for the other team.
Whoa, okay, that's a massive accusation. Working for the other team. Does the source provide any, evidence for that, or is it more inference based on their main theory?
It leans heavily on inference, based on their core theories. Their reasoning, laid out pretty clearly, is this. They claim the FBI's ISP story was deliberately fabricated.
Fabricated?
According to the source, the purpose was to stop people asking the real question. How were these balloons actually controlled?
Because asking that question would lead somewhere else.
Exactly. The source suggests that line of questioning would inevitably, quote, lead to suspect the existence of this parallel internet that Xi Jinping had to keep that secret.
Okay, hold on. A parallel internet. We need to be clear here. The source isn't just talking about, a secure VPN or the dark web, right?
No, not at all. They're suggesting an entirely separate, maybe hidden, global communication infrastructure, something that runs alongside, but outside the public internet we all use, untraceable by normal means.
That's a pretty large concept, a secret internet.
It is, and so if you accept that premise that this parallel internet exists and is used for the balloon, then the source concludes the FBI's story about using regular ISPs is obviously not true.
Because they wouldn't need regular ISPs if they had this other secret network linked presumably to this Elon Musk Geo-Index.
Precisely. In the source's view, the index and this supposed parallel internet are connected. The index is somehow part of or key to this hidden network's operation.
It's a lot to take in. But interestingly, the source doesn't just leave it there as a theory. They suggest a way to potentially find more concrete proof.
Yeah, they acknowledge that just having the shutdown points marked to the index is, well, suggestive, but maybe not. not your typical study or report. This feels much more personal.
Exactly. It's this really intense personal story. It weaves together addiction and a pretty conviction almost that they were deliberately
tampered with, yeah, to be far more addictive than expected.
Right. And our source for this is a YouTube video. It's titled The JUL, uploaded June 21st, 2025 by Ronaldo Aguilar. It's on the Law Enforcement Rapid Fire Tips channel. So let's get to it.
Okay, so to really grasp why his later experience hit him so hard, we kind of need to understand his background with nicotine first, because it wasn't a story of constant failure, was it?
No, not at all. He explains he was a smoker for years, sure, but the key thing is his track record. He actually quit successfully. Multiple times.
Sometimes for long stretches, right? Years.
Yeah, years at a stretch, which, it establishes a really clear baseline. He had demonstrated an ability to manage nicotine addiction before this episode.
That pattern, that history of success, makes the later struggles seem, well, it really challenges a simple view of addiction, doesn't it?
Totally.
It kind of suggests that, okay, well, nicotine's addictive, maybe the delivery method or individual responses or something else can drastically change the experience. His past success really underscores how much a later battle was.
What really jumped out at me, though, despite that history, was how he described relapsing after one of those long breaks.
Okay, so how's that happen?
Well, he quit for 5 years solid. Then he talked about his second date. He identifies the person as and he uses these specific terms agent and manufactured romantic interest.
Strong language there.
Yeah. And he says this person took him to a smoker's lunch where they smoked cigars, tobaccos, he calls them.
And that single event.
That apparently led to him smoking cigarettes again for another 5 years, after being completely off them for 5.
Wow. Okay, so his interpretation involves these agents and manufactured scenarios.
Yeah.
While we're focusing on the addiction aspect.
Right, we can't verify those claims.
It's crucial to see how those beliefs true or not for him, frame his whole experience. They become part of the narrative of his struggle, his relapse. The perceived influence had a very real impact on his actions.
So the story gets even stranger. Years after that relapse, he encounters people.
The transition.
Yeah. He mentions another person, Jillian Walsh. Again, he labels her an agent in manufactured romantic interest. And she's the one who suggested electronic cigarettes.
Okay.
And the reason.
Well, they were more healthy.
Yeah.
The usual arguments. No CO2, fewer chemicals than burning tobacco.
Right, the very common resistance. So he tries one. And his reaction, he calls it what people he found it incredibly nice.
Which is interesting, given he knew addiction, he weakened it before.
Exactly. And he makes that point. He says, look, I understand nicotine is addictive. I've read the warnings. But this specific device was different. Fundamentally different.
So, what did he experience?
He could not quit it. He tried things like patches, the standard stuff. He even mentioned trying buttons, which sounds like maybe some kind of aversion therapy device. Not entirely.
Or unconventional.
But nothing touched it. He felt completely hooked constantly for a solid 6 months.
Which brings us right to the point.
Yep. His core position, his theory, is that the e-cigarette line was spiked with something to make them more addictive.
Now, scientifically, proving intentional, unauthorized additives, that requires specific chemical analysis.
Which he acknowledges he doesn't have the means to do.
But it was worth noting the context of the products themselves around that time. There was a major shift in e-liquids from free-base nicotine to nicotine salt, especially in popular brands like JUL.
What's the practical difference there for you?
Well, nicotine salts, they allow for a much higher concentration of nicotine to be inhaled more smoothly, less harshness on the throat. And it means the nicotine can hit your system faster, more intensely.
So it's going to feel much stronger, much quicker.
Absolutely. For someone used to the slower burn of a cigarette, or maybe older vape technologies with free-base nicotine, this rapid high-dose delivery could genuinely feel like a completely different, much more powerful form of addiction.
So that might explain at least partly why this experience felt so overwhelming and uncontrollable to him, even compared to quitting cigarettes.
It's a plausible contributing factor, yes. It doesn't confirm intentional spiking, obviously, but it offers a potential explanation rooted in the product's known chemistry for why his subjective experience was so drastically different and difficult. Especially given his prior success quitting. That contrast would be challenging.
So he finds himself in this